Well, a very warm welcome back to the Andrew Eborn Show with me, Andrew Eborn. Guess who? I'm joined yet again by Errol Musk. How are we doing, Errol?
Thank you. Well, thanks, and you?
Good,
Yeah.
very good. We're all surviving. We've been talking whilst off air that you've just received actually a quite illuminating message from Elon. Tell me about that.
Yes, Elon's making a lot of saying quite a few things lately, and pointing out recently uh, real silly things that this Waltz bloke said in this debate they had. You know, and Elon makes very good points, so they're worth looking at. Something he sent me, when I sent something to him, he replied. He said it's important to realize that the First Amendment. I'm reading it here. The First Amendment of the American Constitution is not a right given to the people by the government, but rather it's a constitutional law designed to restrain the government from interfering in the people's speech.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if that sounds very complicated, but that's
Well,
very
and it's
interesting.
absolutely right because we've got this around the world now, haven't we? We've got the founder and CEO of Telegram being arrested in France. We've got people
Yes,
threatening Elon with all sorts of regulations. There was the problem in Brazil, which has now seems to have been resolved, but it's all those sort of things. Freedom of speech, that's what they're supposed to be. It's the fundamental right that we
yes.
have. I think, therefore, I am arrested. That's what we're having.
Well,
We spoke about that last time with
yeah.
Starmageddon and what's happening here. Elon must be concerned about freedom of speech, isn't he?
Oh, yes, yes, very much so, obviously. In fact, of course, this very big business that he's bought revolves on freedom of speech. And, something you've just said there's, it's right, but it's also not quite right. And that is that we have only in recent times reached the level of civilization where freedom of speech has become important.
Yeah.
I imagine at times in the past there have been places where freedom of speech was allowed, but mostly in the past, if you look at history, places clamped down on anyone who didn't toe the line, no matter where. So we've actually come a long way. The human being has come a long way, certainly in this millennia or era in which we live. Maybe there have been previous eras, I don't know. I'm talking about previous eras 500,000 years ago, but
Yeah.
certainly we've come a long way where we've reached a stage where human beings have, starting with the French Revolution, more or less, said, I'm entitled to make my point without being put in prison for it. And in fact, if you look at the French writers just before the French Revolution, Rousseau, Voltaire, and so on, anyone who hasn't read their things is missing out on something. Rousseau's social contract, the social contract, where he explains why there can be a king and why there should not be a king, or how you can operate without a king, and so on. The social contract that people make with the leaders that are chosen, and in a country, and of course Voltaire's brilliance. And these people said the things they said on pain of death. And I think if you read their life stories, they were often fleeing to Switzerland or fleeing to Austria, at the time, because it was during the French monarchy that they did their writings, and the Bourbons. And then, of course, you had this French Revolution where it became everyone's right to say what they felt like. And this, of course, exploded into all kinds of anarchy as well. But the idea remained, and I believe, if I'm not wrong, that the French actually, I made a mistake now, French got their idea from the Americans. It was the American Revolution that started it all. And then the French Revolution, I made a mistake. It's the Americans who came up with the idea that every man is born, equal, and every man has a right to pursue happiness.
Yeah.
And that was written in 1876. And
Right.
I have a copy of it here
Ah,
on the wall, the Declaration of Independence, where
yes.
these people wrote things that were way ahead of their time.
Yeah.
That, every man has a right to happiness, and the right to pursue happiness, and the right to express, and so on. And it's an extraordinary document, probably written by men in their early 20s, by the way, not
Yes.
old men,
Yes, I know.
men who
It
were
is
all like
extraordinary when you think
21,
back at it, isn't
22,
it?
23. It's
Yeah.
quite odd, actually. I think the oldest of them all was Washington. And yeah, so we now have reached that stage where it's accepted in most countries today that you are entitled a certain amount of speech, free speech. And now it's not happening too well. I mean, I imagine, for reasons that are not, it's not easy to make reasons and say, oh, they shouldn't do it, they shouldn't do it. But there's always a reason for something as well. So you can't judge without knowing the facts. But in the various countries around the world, you can say quite a lot today that you couldn't say in the past. And now, of course, we've reached this new storm age in England,
Yes.
where the country that sort of was in many ways the birthplace of many of these things, you're not allowed to say things. Unless you toe the line, you're an enemy. The new law in England, you've got to toe the line. If don't toe the line, you will essentially empty the prisons, as Elon has said here also, of 1,800 people, and we'll put you instead in their place if you don't toe the line, which is very un-British, very un-English.
It's a terribly worrying time, and that's how, as you say, Elon came up with the phrase about two-tier care. And I think it's those who are speaking out that end up in jail first, and that's got to be wrong. And it is interesting because everybody's sort of turned around. It's a fundamental right, but there has to be a balance.
It has become a fundamental right.
Yeah.
I mean,
where do you draw the line between, this is the difficult thing, isn't it, between freedom of speech and freedom from consequences for that speech? So, for example, if there's incitement to violence or it's hate speech, where do you draw that line?
Well, it's very, very difficult. I mean, obviously, we have an inbuilt meter. In the average person has got an inbuilt meter, probably instilled in you by your in our world and your world, the British schooling system, very similar in America. You do this and that's right, this is wrong and that's right, and so on and so forth. And what your parents have taught you, what's wrong and what's right, and what you learned possibly at Sunday school, what's wrong and what's right. So what when you've gone over the edge, you've gone too far with something. I think we all know that, and I would imagine that things were better a decade or 20 years ago than they are now. People have had so much freedom now that people are actually flinging insults at each other, horrible insults, and using foul language in the process, which is somewhat new, and isn't, in my opinion, the way things should go. But I imagine it'll bounce back a little bit when a few people get a summons for a lawsuit for saying terrible things about someone else. But no, I think Elon puts it very clearly here that in a country that we've arrived at today in the West, where we hopefully feel we've arrived at today, we have appointed a government that has been told you have a law which does not allow you to interfere in. There's a law against you interfering in the free speech of the people, and it's not a law. It's not a right you gave the people. We gave you the right to govern, but we also told you that you may not infringe upon our rights of free speech, and that's a very, diametrically opposed situation. And today we are sitting in some pretty hard situations. I think the situation in England at the moment is really, it hasn't even reached the hottest point. I would imagine the hottest point is still coming, because if nice people who are, part of the whole economic engine of the country are now sitting in prisons that have been forcibly vacated of prisoners, of people who actually committed crimes that have put them in prison, which I believe has happened in England. Elon says here that the British released 1,800 prisoners to make space for people from the public. If they don't solve that, they can't. If it goes on and nothing happens, then, as I said on a previous discussion with you, then it means that the English people have agreed to the new form of control. Yeah. And as I said to you before, people will agree to be controlled up to a point. Beyond that, they will turn on you. And so we allow police and traffic cops and all that sort of thing to tell us what to do, because we all want that. But when you go to the extent that the Starmer government appears to have gone, this is over the top. And, it's no longer something that people will agree to. And if it turns out that nothing happens in England and these people see out their sentences of 2 years and 3 years in these prisons, and the English people do nothing about it, then one has to come to the conclusion that the English public have agreed to this level of control for the future and for future governments.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And giving up those sort of fundamental rights is such a slippery slope.
I can't see that happening. At the moment, it's a simmering pot. And, a trait of the English people is that you can see if you read history and so on, which I've tried a little bit, and I'm sure others done much more than me. But a trait of the English people is that they are slow to react. They are slow to react. They are not people who suddenly react. They take time.
Right. They so measured rather than on impulse. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, they are slow to react, and it's a measured reaction.
Yeah,
and that's why they have become such a great nation.
But it's worry though, isn't it? And I always say, I mean, fear is the driving human emotion, and people introduce all sorts of rules and regulations because they say, well, there's a problem here, therefore we have to impose this particular regulation with this nanny state. I mean, what's Elon's attitude as to what would be the right sort of regulations? Because clearly things like defamation, there's defamation law in place, so you can't defame a particular person and spoil their good name. You don't want to incite people to hatred and riots and crimes. Clearly anything which is a criminal activity, you need to make sure that that's not being endorsed, if you like. What is the limit? I mean, just to be clear on that, what would Elon say would be the limit?
Well, this is what I would think he would say. Look, people are not stupid. So it's a big mistake to come to the conclusion that people can be incited. I could run around, a person like yourself, trying to incite you to do this and that, and you'll tell me, Errol, go home, have a whiskey and get some sleep. I'm not going to incite you. Right. Nothing I do is going to incite you. In other words, you're not stupid. So you can't incite people to violence. You might have a bit of luck here and there with people, with youth who, irresponsible youth who haven't reached the point where they feel they're going to be called to task for what they're doing. But generally speaking, you can't incite people. People have already come to the conclusion of what they think and what they feel by the time you have. And so, saying to, these movie scenes of French crowds in the French Revolution, all jamming the streets, and some bloke with the tricolour saying, burn it down, and they all say, yeah, let's burn it down. That doesn't happen. People aren't that stupid. People are not like that. They're generally intelligent, and they may gather, as they did on a lot of these that I saw, these gatherings in England, but they're not really. They're there to actually make a point. They've given it some thought. And they've got out of their comfort zone at home, where they've been comfortably doing something, and they've got up and had to go some distance and walk some distance as well. Very unpleasant. They have to do that, and then get there and try to, put the effort into it to say, look, something's going on here which we don't agree with, and you can't now put people like. And then of course, if those people are suddenly confronted by rows of police with batons and shields, not the old constable who stood there with nothing, in his hands and said, I don't want you to do this, men, and would probably have had a much better result in England if they were normal constables instead of shielded people with batons. You're going to make those people angry, right? Because they're going to see they are being forced to in a way, and it would be you or me, and where you or me, you and I, I would never say something angry or outspoken, I've had enough of this, I'm not putting up with this, or whatever. Or if you see someone nearby being unjustly beaten with a truncheon or something like that, and you react to that, you can't be put in prison for that. That's not human.
No.
That's not human.
And you're right. It then becomes a pressure cooker. The more you push people down, the more pressure and resentment's going to build up until it really explodes.
Well, yes, and as I said, the English have they've sort of become the modern Rome. They did become the sort of modern version of Rome, in my opinion. Because they've always kept the Roman legacy alive all the years in England. From the 300 or 400 years that the Romans occupied England, and England, to my mind, was sort of like an extension of the Roman Empire in a way, in my mind, anyway. Well, and always sort of doing things in a very measured and intelligent way. And so the English grew to be the largest empire the world has ever known by their measured response to things and their very human approach to everything. And there isn't a place that the English that went to that wasn't improved by the arrival of the English. No. When the English came to the Cape, for example, where I'm now, there were no public schools, there were no roads, there were a few tracks. And within a period of about 10 years, there were 17 miles, as I recall, of roads. There were about 10 public schools and so forth. And that's what the English brought, civilization, actually. And they did that all around the world. And so it's good remembering that. It's worth remembering that. The other thing is that we now have the English themselves, the very people who did this in the world, being told that if they open their mouths, they're going to be thrown in prison. This is so far from the English way that if you told that to, people of the past, Churchill or something, he would say, "I don't believe you."
Right.
He'd simply say, "I don't believe you." And, so, we have to see what happens now. As I said, if the English do nothing about it over the next couple of years, in fact, then it suggests that the English populace has agreed to this new level of control.
Yeah,
and once they've agreed
you're
to
absolutely right, and it is worrying. It's not just in England. I mean, you also have in France where and Elon has basically been threatened with arrest and a crime over there for basically saying that men should not take part in women's sport. There was that sort of side, that whole sort of discussion you might remember during the Olympics, and the whole question about that particular athlete. But according to the IOC rules, they were entitled to enter. So without going specifically there, but people should be able to state their opinion as a general proposition that it's wrong for men, biological men, to take part in women's sports. That's an opinion. It's an opinion, but it's also an opinion that people should be able to make.
It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And when you see that some man has just won the 400 meter at the Olympics, a ladies 400 meter, and he's broken all the records, and the person who came in second was way behind him. I mean, and he's now decided, because he's decided he's a woman. I mean, that man who was quite clearly a man who hit this Chinese girl, or I think it was a Chinese boxer, what do you call it? Fist boxing, or there's a word for it, kickboxing, something like that. Yeah. And this man, who's obviously a man, beat this woman. And in the first round, she said, "Sorry, I'm not doing this."
Yeah, that was actually the boxing side, and that particular example, Errol. I think the fault for that one lay at the IOC, because their rules, their eligibility rules, say that whatever it says on your passport, that's what we're going to go by.
Yes, but the boxing association that in fact said that that's a man.
Yeah,
no, but I mean, it's ridiculous, and I don't know what else to say except that it's ridiculous. And whoever's pushing these ideas, well, I mean, they're not going to succeed, so forget it. It's not going to work.
Which rather, I mean, the best example I saw was somebody, they had everybody on pedal bikes, and somebody was on a motorbike, and they were storming ahead, and they said, well, that motorbike identifies as a pedal bike. So
yes, I identify. I'm on a motorbike, but I identify as a pedal bike. It's laughable, but it is funny, and it does make for media. The media gets some reading done out of it, or get something out of it. Pumping it. I've never seen anybody. I have in my life seen transdressers out there, transdressing people, which I was quite amazed to discover. I was told that woman is a man years ago when I was a teenager, at a nightclub one time. But I mean, it's been with us for years, that sort of cross-dressing stuff. And I mean, if you take Monty Python, they're always cross-dressing in Monty Python.
Well, they have. There's a great scene. You're right in a number of those things.
No,
Where
no,
he says, I identify as a woman. Yeah, I'd stick up for the rights. So that's
my right as a woman to have babies. But you're a man.
Exactly. Well, I don't have a womb.
Yes, I know, but I'm a man who identifies as a woman, and my right to have a child.
and I think that's right. But you have to laugh or you'll cry, won't you? What I always try and say, I try to be respectful for everybody in the conversation. But where it is, and I say very, very different rules for the IOC, and I put the blame at the IOC about that, because the person who won was eligible to do it. They have always identified as a woman. That's what they would say. But there's a reason in sport that men cannot compete against women, because if something's about physical strength, then it's obvious that doesn't make sense. If it's like darts or something like that, or snooker, then it doesn't matter.
That's all right.
But if you're boxing or other things, doesn't make sense, does it?
No, mixed doubles or tennis, stuff like that. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that can be done. But to put a man in as a weightlifter and he wins,
yes,
I mean, come on, come on.
And one I always praise. We were trying to get you on together with J.K. Rowling, who wrote all the Harry Potter stuff, who's always a big advocate for women's rights in particular and freedom of speech. And they had this law in Scotland, the hate law, effectively, where they were going, and they threatened. The police said, we're gonna investigate every single allegation of hate law, and JK came out and said, well, I'm going to say all of this, come and arrest me first, because they're not getting the people who are stealing the mobile phones, they're not getting people who are robbing people in the streets or breaking into people's homes. They're going to focus on those who are saying things, and that's got to be wrong, doesn't it?
Well, of course, and it comes back to what we were talking about, attempts to introduce controls. And you might ask, well, why do they want these controls? Obviously, they're frightened. So you only want to have controls if you're frightened. Yeah. If I'm running a business of some kind of factory or something, and I run around putting signs up, you can't go out at lunch until lunchtime, or if you go out through this door, you have to clock out, and if you come through this, you have to do that. And that's all the controls I'm putting in. It's basically, I'm frightened. I'm frightened of being cheated by my workers, maybe, or I'm frightened of something. And if you go to a place where, and I have seen places like that, especially the places that we run, my two boys run and that I've run, we have no rules at all. Right. So you can, there's no rules. So if you feel like beetling off and not being at work, well, you can. We might notice it, but after a while, but you can do it. There's no rules. And we don't have the fear. We don't frighten, you see. So,
and if somebody beetles off, though, do you keep them? You say there's no rules. I mean, if somebody beetles off...
No. We presume they've done it for a good reason.
Oh, I see.
And, and so our employees have stayed with us their whole lives, or more or less their whole career. And we, so what you have to come to the conclusion of with Starmer and his crowd is that they are frightened. Right. They must be frightened. And if you look at the Biden setup, they're frightened. They want these controls. They want the FBI to be politicized, and so on, and the police in England, because they are frightened. They're frightened of the population. And I don't think there's any doubt about it. Yeah. They're frightened. Because you don't do things like that unless you're frightened.
Talking of frightened, though, I mean, all these threats to arrest, and as I say, you see the CEO and founder of Telegram being arrested. Is Elon frightened he'd be arrested?
Oh no, he's one of those cooks who would enjoy it,
Oh, really?
But Elon is, although he's my son, I mean, and I shouldn't say that. He's he's like a super individual. He's very stoic.
Right.
So it takes a great deal to crack him, And he from a child, he always had this thing that if he gives his word, that means it. You're not going to change it. He's not going to change it. If he promises you something, you're getting it.
Right.
He's going to come. He's going to fulfill his promise, and so on. So he's, in that respect, Kimball is much more. Yeah, I like being with Kimball much more, because Kimball, you can admit to him, oh, I cocked up on something, And he said, oh, Dad, I also cocked up on that, But he's cocked up with Elon, and he'd look at you, and then look away, and go and give you a good answer. So I've had the situation with Elon, people come to me and say, very kind of you to have invited us here. And I said to whatever it was, your lunch, whatever it is. And when there's a few people around, and but I have it, people say to me, I don't think your son likes me at all.
Right.
Now, Elon, I don't think your son, Elon, likes me at all. You can see the person's in a bit of pain over it, you see. And I say, no, why do you say that? Well, I don't want to cause a trouble. No, please. I say, wait. I go to Elon. I say to Elon, did you meet so-and-so over there? I think so. He might say, he thinks you don't like him. Oh, he said, well, why does he think that? And then he'd come over and he'd march over. He's got the 6-foot stride, Elon. He's got this huge stride, because he's very tall and he's got this huge long legs, got this huge stride. And he'd march over with his hand out, saying, oh, I came to say goodbye or something, and he'd change everything.
Right.
But it's easy to think that he doesn't, because he keeps to himself, you see. And you might make a comment to him, and if he's thinking about something, he won't really respond. He'll take it in, and you might think after he's never heard you, but he'll say, I did hear you that. But he was busy thinking. He didn't have time to come up with a response to you at that point. Right. So he's a bit odd in that respect. But I wish the police who arrest him good luck, because they're going to feel like, they've arrested the wrong person, or, he's a very straight person, so I wish them a lot of strength.
Yeah, and it's interesting. And J.K. Rowling, Rowling, as in bowling, basically she said the same thing, and they buckled in the end, because the pressure and support that she received, in the same way as Elon is the sort of the hero for freedom of speech. Yes. I think on that sort of basis, we need people who are prepared to do it. I have a lot of journalists on this show who are very worried now that they've been speaking out a particular narrative that may be not supported by others, and they're very worried that they will get arrested, and what they're suggesting is they will then get the police who will discover things, that they'll do it under the Terrorism Act, because that gives the police more power to basically go to their mobile phones and various other devices on a fishing
or try and embarrass them over some relationship they had.
Yeah,
that's a killer in America. They find out that some very normal guy now who's married and got children and everything, that in the early stages of the same marriage he's in, he had an affair with somebody, but his wife made up afterwards. But they'll bring that up and make him look like a bad person. They do. They go into find things like that. Luckily today people have become inured to it. They just laugh it off, and say nonsense. I don't believe that. So, well, not that I don't believe it. So what? And
I think that's the thing to do. What I always urge everybody to do is to question everything. And what I love about our conversations is we try and put things, it's always about more light and less heat, isn't it? Because you turn around and say, look, unpack things. There are reasons, just as you said that Elon, people might think he was being dismissive or didn't like somebody. Actually, it's just a different personality. And I think sometimes that personality, there are lots of people like that who you think, oh, they don't like you, but actually they're thinking about things, or their mind's distracted with 100 other things.
You're completely mistaken. Yes, you're completely mistaken. And, so, Elon, he would handle anything that comes his way. I have no doubt of that. I mean, I made sure of it. By the time they left me and went over to America, they were ready they'd been seen a lot of things with me as well. So they were ready for a lot of things, and they did very well in doing so. Both of them, Kimball as well,
Yeah. Well, next time we meet, we're going to talk about Kimball and how he started growing vegetables at a very early age, and also about his school plans, and that he was going to speak to King Charles.
Teaching children.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thousands and thousands of children at schools how to grow vegetables,
well,
which I learned in England on a patch next to the railway line, and which I taught to Kimball, and which Kimball now in his gigantic way, teaches to thousands and thousands of children, even to the extent that Prince Charles in England asked him to come and tell them how they can do it in England as well.
Fantastic. Well, we're going to look at all of that in the next episode. But for now, thank you very much for joining us.
Okay.